Right, I'm going to start over just real briefly. For those of you, I just hit record after remembering to hit record. But this presentation is Financial Aid 101 for new counselors. We recognize that some of you may not be new counselors and you're here for a refresher, and we welcome anyone that is attending this presentation. These slides will be posted to the owasfa.org website upon completion of this presentation, as well as the recorded version of this. So if any of your colleagues were unable to attend the live session, a recorded version will be uploaded to the OWASFA website. It's a technical difficulty. All right, so about OWASFA. OWASFA is the Ohio Association of Financial Aid Administrators, and this presentation is being brought to you by OWASFA and the Outreach Committee. The Outreach Committee is a part of OWASFA, which is a volunteer organization, and our primary responsibility is to provide resources of pertinent and current financial information to counselors and TRIO, staff members, admission staff, high school counselors, access advisors, those that don't actively work in the financial aid world every single day. And so we disseminate this information through a variety of our activities, including this FA 101 presentation and other presentations that we will talk about a little bit later on this morning. OWASFA is providing this information to you today as a free service. You do have permission to copy and distribute these materials to your students and your families. This presentation may not be appropriate to share with your families, but we do out on the owasfa.org website have a financial aid night that has been recorded that you can share with your families. It could benefit your families, but this is more targeted toward counselors. You may never charge to share this information with your families and your students. And sometimes permission may need to be granted for other use of this information or these materials. And you can reach out to us at the OWASFA Outreach Committee email listed there on your screen. So this presentation today is drawing on information from OWASFA, from NASFA, which is the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, as well as FSA, our federal student aid. So this webinar, again, is just an introduction to financial aid. For a more in-depth presentation and discussion, you are encouraged to attend our OWASFA counselor workshops being offered in November. We are very excited this year. This was a very last-minute decision, and it's taking us a little longer than usual to get this information out, but we're excited that this year we're going to come back in person. Last year we did the counselor workshops virtually. We were monitoring the circumstances right now, and we've just finalized all of our sites this week. So posted there on your screen will be the sites that we will be presenting in person and their dates. The registration for the workshops is requested for attendance, and this will go live soon on the owasfa.org website. So keep an eye out for that. We will be offering a virtual option on November 30th as well, but we are hoping that most of you will be able to take advantage of one of the sites and the dates that we have available so that you can attend in person. It's just better interaction. We have more opportunity to answer your questions. So we're hoping that we'll be able to get everyone back in person. So let's get started on Financial Aid 101. So we talk first of all about the FAFSA. What is the FAFSA? It is a standard free form that collects information about the student and the parent. Submission of the FAFSA is always free. So always caution your families to never pay to submit the FAFSA application. We will be referencing the .gov website throughout this presentation. Make sure that families are going to studentaid.gov and not FAFSA.org or FAFSA.com. Those are paid websites, and most often they won't know that they're on a paid website until they've gotten to the very end after entering all of their information and they're being asked to provide a credit card. So never pay to submit the FAFSA form. The FAFSA then collects information about the student and the parent, calculates out what we call an EFC. We'll discuss what an EFC is in a minute. And then that helps the financial aid office determine what type of financial aid the student is eligible for. And financial aid basically is just funds that are provided to the students and their families to help pay for their educational expenses. So the FAFSA, again, collects information about the student and the parent, and it calculates an expected family contribution, or an EFC. It is a measure of taxable and untaxable income for a specific year, and then current assets of the student and parent. So for seniors in high school right now, they will be providing student and parent taxable and untaxable income for 2020. The EFC also is based on the size of the family, the number of family members in college, and other demographic information such as marital status of the student or the parent. The colleges then use that EFC to determine how much aid the student is eligible to receive and from what funds, and that we use the EFC then to put together a financial aid offer. The EFC stays the same regardless of where the student attends college. So the family's income and assets don't change, obviously, depending on what type of school they go to. And again, as a reminder, students who are seniors right now will be filing the 22-23 FAFSA for the 22-23 academic year. And that FAFSA will go live October 1st. So here in a few days, families will be able to apply for financial aid for next academic year using the 22-23 FAFSA form. Please remind your students that they do have to reapply for financial aid every year. The FAFSA is year specific. So while the admissions process is typically completed in the fall and going into the spring of their senior year, and they make decisions and they shouldn't have to do admissions process again, the financial aid process does repeat itself each year. So the student does need to reapply for financial aid. Every October 1st is when the new year FAFSA is released. We encourage all students to file the FAFSA as early as possible after October 1. The earlier they apply, the earlier they may receive their financial aid offer. And we want to get those offers out specifically to freshmen as soon as possible, because we know that they're trying to make decisions on where they plan to attend. And they want to be able to see all the financial aid offers and compare them. So the sooner the student and parent complete the FAFSA form on or after October 1, the earlier they will get their financial aid offer. Also, many schools have smaller pots of financial assistance. Some of it is federal aid and some of it's institutional aid. And that aid tends to go to the students who apply earlier. Once the funds are exhausted, the students will miss out on that opportunity. So again, we want to encourage the students and parents to apply as soon as possible on or after October 1. In addition, the admissions process and the financial aid process in most schools are connected. And what I mean by that is, if a student goes out and files a FAFSA and they list an institution that they have not applied for admission to yet, they probably will not hear from that college or university until there's an admissions application to match up with the financial aid application. So most schools are not going to take the time to review a FAFSA if a student hasn't applied for admission. Now, that student doesn't have to have accepted an offer for admission, or they don't even have to have been offered admission yet to list the school on the FAFSA and get a financial aid offer. Again, we know that students want to see those financial aid offers before they make decisions on accepting an admission offer. So let's talk about financial aid deadlines. And I personally do not like the term deadline for financial aid. There are financial aid deadlines for the submission of the FAFSA form, but many schools use what are called financial aid deadlines or financial aid priority dates. And we create those dates to encourage the students, again, to apply as early as possible so we can get aid offers out to them, but also, again, because of those small pots of money. So if a student is applying to more than one college or university, they will want to find out the financial aid priority date for all of the schools that they are submitting the FAFSA to. And they want to make sure that the FAFSA is submitted to the schools or by the school's earliest deadline. So if they have a school that has a February 1 date and a school that has a March date and an April date, please don't wait until April. Make sure that their FAFSA is submitted before February 1st for that priority date. Most of our priority dates are listed on the financial aid website. So students should be able to go to the financial aid website and see what the financial aid priority dates are. A lot of admissions representatives will include this information in their admissions materials. So students can look at admissions materials and see if it's included the FAFSA priority date for the school. Some schools have November and December dates. So that would be November and December of 2021. Those aren't real common. but students need to be figuring out those priority dates now so that when the FAFSA goes live October 1, they know if they're up against a November 1 or a November 15th priority date. The bulk of schools that have priority dates are usually February 1, February 15th, March 1, and sometimes into April. And then some schools don't even have a priority date. They don't even list a date out there. So again, make sure that you're advising students to find the priority date for all of the schools where they're applying and make sure their FAFSA is submitted by the school with the earliest date. OASFA has compiled a list of FAFSA priority dates for Ohio schools, and that is out on our OASFA website under counselor resources. And it's an Excel spreadsheet of all the schools that responded to our survey. We do the survey every year, and it gives you an idea of what their priority dates are and other information about each institution. The FAFSA form is the only application that a student needs to complete to apply for all federal and state financial assistance. However, some schools do have some institutional applications that are specific to their institutional funds. And so when students are reviewing schools' financial aid sites to know the priority dates, they also should be looking for, are there any other forms that I need to complete in order to apply for institutional aid? An example of that form could be the CSS College Profile Form. Some private schools will use this because it digs deeper into the student and family's financial situation, and they use that then to determine the student's eligibility for institutional dollars. Also, if a student is applying for early decision, they have a whole different set of priority dates. Also, high school transcripts, if that's being requested, they often won't get an admissions offer or maybe a financial aid offer if they haven't submitted some unofficial high school transcripts, for example. And then we'll talk about verification here in a minute, but if a student is selected for a process called verification from the financial aid office, sometimes the schools will set a financial aid verification date, a deadline date. And again, if the student misses that date, it doesn't necessarily mean that they won't be packaged with financial aid, but it could impede their ability to have maximized their financial aid. So they want to check for FAFSA priority dates. They want to check for verification priority dates. They want to check for transcript deadlines, any other deadline that may be embedded into the financial aid or the admissions process. So we call the process of the FAFSA that calculates that EFC need analysis. Basically, the FAFSA is assessing the family's financial need and analyze it to determine how much financial aid they should be eligible for. The federal government's philosophy behind the need analysis is that parents have the primary responsibility to pay for their dependent child's education to the extent that they are able. They also believe that students have a responsibility to contribute to their educational costs as well, which is why there's a parent set of questions and there's a student set of questions on the FAFSA form. The need analysis then evaluates the family's ability to pay for the student's educational costs, and it has to be evaluated in an equitable and consistent manner. And the FAFSA formula does that. It evaluates the information provided in an equitable and consistent manner. They also believe that families should be evaluated in their present financial condition. And so the 22-23 FAFSA is asking families to report their 2020 taxable and untaxable income. So that is the best way to capture at that point in time what we feel the family's financial strength or their financial condition is by going back to 2020 taxable income. Now, we recognize prior to the pandemic that may not be an accurate picture of the family's current financial situation. But now more than ever, because of the pandemic, schools do recognize that families' 2020 income may not be indicative of their current financial situation. And so schools have the ability to recognize that these special circumstances exist that could affect the family's ability to pay for the student's education. And we will talk about those special circumstances in a few minutes. So let's focus more on the EFC, the expected family contribution. As I said, the student and the parent have a responsibility to contribute to their educational cost. So there are two components of the EFC. There's a student contribution, which looks at the student's 2020 income and their current assets if they have any. and the parent's contribution, which is the parent's 2020 income and their current assets for dependent students. So the FAFSA calculates a contribution for the student, it calculates a contribution for the parent, and it adds the two together, and that is what the EFC is. Again, it is the amount that the family can reasonably be expected to contribute. The EFC is simply an index or a figure then that the financial aid office uses to determine the student's eligibility for aid. It is not what the family has to pay to the institution. So if the EFC is calculated at $11,500, that is just the index or the philosophy that they should be able to pay. It is not what they owe the school for the 22-23 academic year. This number is used to determine how much aid the student is eligible for, and the formula does not measure a family's willingness to pay, it's measuring their ability to pay. And as I mentioned earlier, the EFC stays the same regardless of the college. So a family's ability to pay doesn't change whether they go to Columbus State, Ohio State, or Otterbein. What changes is the cost of attendance. The EFC is calculated on a federal formula. I call it a complex calculator. It takes in all of the information that's provided, it evaluates all of the information, and it calculates out this EFC. But built into that EFC are different components that allow for an income protection allowance, an asset protection allowance. It doesn't look straight at income and say, oh, family made $50,000 and has $10,000 in assets. All of that is available for a student's education. That's just not realistic. So the calculation built into it and determines based on the number of people in the household, whether or not the parents are married, how much of that aid or how much of that income and assets should be available as a part of that contribution. So then the college takes that EFC and we compose what we call a cost of attendance. We'll talk about those components in a minute. We take the cost of attendance that's established in the financial aid office. We subtract that EFC. So we subtract from that cost of attendance what the family should be able to contribute. And that is how much need-based aid we can offer the student. So that is how we determine the student's eligibility for need-based aid. So each financial aid office that participates in federal aid must create a cost of attendance for students attending their college. And most schools have at least 2 or 3 costs of attendance, one for students that are living on campus, one for students living off campus, and one for students living with parents. And then students in specific programs may have a specific cost of attendance. But each cost of attendance must at the minimum contain a direct cost, so an assessment of what tuition and fees are typically for the year, and if the school offers room and board, an estimate of what the room and board would cost. We call those direct costs because those are typically fees that are assessed to the student through the student billing process. So the student is charged tuition and fees, charged for room and board, and financial aid assists to help pay for that. Then we have built into that cost of attendance the indirect cost. So we know that it doesn't just cost the student money to go to school and pay for tuition fees and room and board. We know that if they're a commuter student, they have transportation expenses, or if they're not a commuter student, they have transportation expenses to go home on holidays and breaks. We also know that miscellaneous and personal expenses are composed in there. We still want students to shower and brush their teeth while they're in school. So we know that that is also a part of the cost of attendance. And then of course, books and supplies are built into that. So those are the indirect costs. So the financial aid office gets an estimate of all of these costs and builds together what they think the student's cost of attendance is, typically for 2 terms, a 9-month period of time, 2 semesters. So here's a comparison of a higher cost institution, a mid-cost institution, and a lower cost institution. So as I mentioned, what changes at each of those schools is the cost of attendance. So you can see at the top across there, $58,000 for high cost, $40,000 for mid cost, and $22,000 for low cost. EFC does not change. So the family's ability to pay, if their EFC is $8,000, doesn't change. It stays the same across the board. But if you see the subtraction process there, so cost of attendance minus EFC, you can see that a student will have a higher unmet need at a higher cost of institution and a lower unmet need at a lower cost of institution. then it's the financial aid office's responsibility to try to fill that need with financial aid offers. So let's talk a little bit more about the FAFSA form. There are a variety of ways that the student can submit the FAFSA form. The paper FAFSA application is available. Less than 2% of the population file a paper FAFSA. We discourage it. It takes much longer to process. It allows for more mistakes. Most of the population will complete the application electronically, and the bulk of the population will do the FAFSA on the web and a desktop version. There is a mobile app, and there is a mobile access and a My Student Aid app. At this point in time, most of us are still at the age where we're more comfortable probably using the desktop version over a mobile version or a student aid app, but those are, all three are available. The IRS data retrieval tool is a tool that allows families to leave FAFSA and go over to the IRS and bring back their taxable and untaxable income right onto the FAFSA form. And that data retrieval tool is accessible on all three of the electronic versions. Obviously, you can't use it on the paper version. And we encourage the use of the data retrieval tool because it allows families to not have to enter all of the taxable information and untaxable information in and risk making mistakes in the data entry process. Also, if a family is selected for verification and they're requested to provide verification of their 2020 taxable and untaxable income, if they do the data retrieval successfully, that is one less document that they have to provide to the financial aid office for the verification process. Now, if any of you have filed a FAFSA before or have a little bit of experience in the FAFSA process, for years we've been directing families to FAFSA.gov to submit the FAFSA form. And that site is still available, but probably will be phased out here soon. FSA has created a website, studentaid.gov, which contains all things student aid. It's all in one site, and it makes it easier for families to go to one site to access the application for the FAFSA, direct loan information, FSA ID information. So we want to direct families to studentaid.gov, the key being the .gov reference there. So we encourage the FAFSA on the web or any version of electronic because it does have built-in edits to prevent costly errors. So take, for example, the student's date of birth. They put in July 15th, 2021. Well, the FAFSA knows that that's not logical, and it will pop up an error and ask the student to correct that answer. So it knows what's logical and what's not logical and will pop it up. It also has skip logic built into it that allows the student and parent to skip unnecessary questions. So take, for example, the parents say that they are divorced or separated. It knows to only look for income information for one parent. And again, on the electronic versions, you have the option to use the IRS data retrieval tool, faster, timely submission. So if a family types in their FAFSA information, signs it electronically and submits it, the FAFSA is usually processed within 48 to 72 hours. Online, very detailed instructions and help. So anytime that you're in a question on the FAFSA form, there's a little question mark beside it, and the family can click that question mark and it pops up an explanation of what it is looking for in that question as far as the answer. And using FAFSA on the web makes the process easier each year. So remember, students and parents need to reapply every year for financial aid. So the next year when they log in and identify the student, it carries over all of the demographic information that typically doesn't change. And if something has changed, they can correct it. But they will have all of that pre-populated, less data entry. Then all they have to do is update it with the next tax year's taxable and untaxable income, current assets, and submit the FAFSA form. So it speeds up the process each year when they do it electronically. The first step that we want families to start with before they actually go and apply for a financial aid using the FAFSA is to request an FSA ID, which is the electronic signature for the FAFSA form. And so we want families to get the FSA ID. They can do this prior to October 1. The FSA ID is not year specific. So they can go out now. You can encourage families to go out now and obtain this FSA ID. The website is listed there. It is on studentaid.gov, and you can see the screenshot there that shows you how to create the FSA ID. It basically collects it has three main steps. One, they click their login information. enter their personal information, and then their mailing address, email, phone, and then they answer challenge questions. So the student and the parent each create their own username and password. Parents and students may not use the same email address for each of their applications. So the parent and student, let's back up a second. The parent and student must create their own FSA ID. So the student should go in and create their own, and the parent should go in and create their own. When they're in there, they will be asked to provide an email account. They cannot use, once an email account is used, it cannot be used again. So do not use the same email account for the parent or the student. Also encourage them or tell them not to use their high school email accounts, since those tend to be deactivated when the student graduates from high school. Each student who is filing a FAFSA form must have their own FSA ID and their own FAFSA. But only a parent of multiple children, only one parent needs one FSA ID. So let me just use an example here. 4 people in the household, mom, dad, and 2 children. If 2 children are in college at the same time, each child needs their own FSA ID and their own FAFSA form, but only one parent whose information will be on that form needs the FSA ID, and they use the same parent FSA ID for all the students that are applying for financial aid. The FSA ID is used not only for FAFSA completion, but also allows access to certain U.S. Department of Education websites. So once the student goes in and creates access, an FSA ID, that will give them access to log into studentaid.gov, and they can then sign a promissory note for a student loan. They can access their student loan information. That FSA ID is used by the student and parent all the way through the financial aid process and beyond if they borrow student loans. When possible, we encourage each family or each parent and student to verify their email and mobile address using the secured code that's provided. So when they plug in an email address, it will ask them to verify it, and they click the verify button. It will send an email to their email address and give them a secured code that they take back to the FSA ID application. Same thing, they put in the mobile phone, it will send them a text with a secured code that they then take back and verify. This allows them 2 additional measures of re-accessing the FSA ID should they get locked out or have issues with the FSA ID. So this is a screenshot of studentaid.gov, and you can see where the red circle is there at the top. If you click the apply for aid, it drops down and it gives them the FAFSA application. Then the family, for the first time that they're going in, will click start now. They'll put in the student's username and password, their FSA ID, and it will now open up the FAFSA form for that student. It will automatically take from the FSA ID application the student's name, date of birth, social security number, and address, and pre-populate it for the student based on what they provided for their FSA ID application. The family can save the FAFSA as they go through, and if they need to log out and come back in later before they submit it, then next time they go in, they will click log in, plug in the student's username and password, and they'll now be able to pick back up where they were on the FAFSA form. Right now, if you were to go to the FAFSA form, you would see one financial aid year out there. It would say start the 21-22 FAFSA form. That FAFSA form is for our currently enrolled college students because they can still apply for aid up until June 30 of next year. On October 1, when a family goes into studentaid.gov, they will see this option, which school year are you applying for financial aid? Seniors in high school will be selecting the start the 22-23 FAFSA form. So please remind your parents and students, the 22-23 FAFSA form is what is for financial aid, typically for starting next fall of 22. So frequent FAFSA errors are filing the wrong FAFSA year after October 1. And we have a handful probably at every college where the student will check in with us in the summer and want to know where their financial aid offer is. And when we look them up, we see you filed the wrong FAFSA year. We just received an email in the outreach email today that a parent was really excited to get the process started, went out, did 2 FAFSAs for their twins, and then realized that they filed the wrong FAFSA year. Unfortunately, you can't just carry all of that information over to the 22-23 FAFSA form when it goes live. But what they will be able to do is when they log in and go under 22-23, it should carry the demographic information over, but they will have to unfortunately go through and update the FAFSA form with the 2020 taxable and untaxable income. So it's not the worst thing if they file the wrong FAFSA year, but we just want to make sure that they start with the correct year to begin with. Other mistakes we see are failing to use the student's and the parent's legal name in both the FSA ID as well as the FAFSA form. So we want to tell families, use the names as they appear on the Social Security card. Do not use nicknames. When the FSA ID application is submitted as well as the FAFSA, it goes up against the Social Security Administration database to verify that the student and parent have entered everything in and they are who they say they are. I had a parent come up to me at a financial aid night recently and said, you know, I have never gone by any other name than my nickname. And he's like, so does it matter? And I said, it will matter, because most of the time when you use your name, it's not going up against the Social Security Administration database and looks for a match. So in this case, always use the legal name as it appears on the Social Security card. Other mistakes is, you know, missing those financial aid priority dates or financial aid deadlines. We want students to make sure that everything is in by the dates that we have posted. As silly as it sounds, just transposing digits and inserting extra digits, it happens all the time. We're so used to keying information in and we miss a digit. So we want to encourage families to, when you get to the very end of the FAFSA, it pulls all of the information out before you submit it. We want them to go and check those figures and make sure that they didn't add a zero, because that does change that EFC dramatically, or that they didn't mix up the digits. Making sure that the Social Security numbers and the date of birth are correct. Before they hit submit on that FSA ID application, triple check the Social Security numbers and the date of birth and make sure that they're accurate. Submitting the wrong parent's financial information, including the step parent. So biological and adoptive parents are the only parents that can file a FAFSA form, not a guardian, not a foster parent, not grandma and grandpa, because I live with them. So we want to make sure that families are reading and knowing who is the parent for the purposes of the FAFSA form, and that they're including the proper information for the proper parent on the form. Also, what untaxed income does need to be reported. So some of the untaxed income can be pulled over from the IRS through the data retrieval process, but some of the untaxed income is not reported, and they will need to read the questions very carefully to know where on the W-2, for example, can I find the untaxed income that needs to be provided? And that's where that help on the FAFSA form, that question mark, will help them know what untaxed income needs to be provided. I think I saw somebody raise your hand, and if that was a mistake, that's okay. But if you have a question, would you please type it into the Q&A, not the chat box. Another mistake is incorrectly reporting the household size and the number in the household that are in college. So again, on the FAFSA form, if they're not quite sure who should be reported in their household, they should read the instructions. So here's an example. Your parents are included in the household, as well as the dependent children of the parents. But let's say grandma also lives with us, and grandma is receiving her own retirement, her own Social Security. She's contributing to the household. If grandma is providing more than 50% of her own support, she should not be included in the household size simply because she lives in the same household. So we want families to read the directions carefully to know who should be included in the household size and who should not be included, as well as the number in college. So mom and dad on a FAFSA form, unfortunately, cannot be included in the number of college, but other dependents, other children that are in college that are listed in the household can be included in the number of college. So we just want to make sure that families are reading the instructions and know who should be included and who should not be included. And then another big error is what to include in investments or net worth. And this is also explained in the directions on the FAFSA form, what to include and what not to include. And so we want families to read that. We do get a few corrections each year because they included their 401k, and that should not be included in the FAFSA form as an asset. So I also want to stop here for a second and remind you, we're not going to go in depth into all of these items today's webinar, but those counselor workshops, if you're able to attend, we will dig deeper into a lot of these problem areas on the FAFSA. We will tell you what investments should be included. So if you want more information about what should and shouldn't be included on the FAFSA, please try to attend those counselor workshops. So if you're working with a student who is looking at more than 10 colleges and universities, they can list up to 10 colleges and universities to submit the FAFSA to on the first submission of the FAFSA form. So if they're looking at more than 10, they want to find the 10 that have the earliest financial aid priority dates, list those 10 on the first application, submit it. And remember, if they do an electronic signature, it's processed within 48 to 72 hours. They can then go back in and add up to 10 more colleges and universities and resubmit the FAFSA form. Couple points here that we like to stress is it does not matter in which order the student lists the schools. So when a FAFSA comes to COTC or OSU, we cannot see what other schools are listed. Just the school that I work for can I see. So it doesn't matter what order they have listed them in. Also, if they go back in to add more schools, if they've already filled all their slots with 10, they will have to bump off a school or two to add another school. That does not tell the school that received the FAFSA already that I've been removed from the FAFSA form. And that's been a concern of parents. You know, I don't want to go in and bump OSU off because I don't want them to think that I'm still not considering them. We don't see that information when the FAFSA comes into the financial aid office. So the student list, all of their colleges and universities, again, they don't have to have applied for admission to add a school to the FAFSA, but remember the school's financial aid office may not bring that FAFSA in if it doesn't have an admissions application to match up to it. And then for each school that they list, they have to give their housing plans. So it'll have a drop down for each school. Will you be living on campus, off campus with parents? And they just need to do the best they can in answering the question at the time that they're submitting the FAFSA form. If their housing plans change, they can work with the financial aid office to update that. Once a student has listed all of their schools, they can click the box that says compare school information. I like this feature. It gives them right away a good idea of where to get to the school's website, the type of school. Is it private? Is it public? Is it 2? Is it 4-year? It will give you the net price average. So if a student said, hey, mom and dad, this is my dream school, let's just put it on there and see what happens. They can go to this, compare the schools, and they can see an idea of how much the school will cost them to attend. So just some real good key information about each school that they have listed to have the FAFSA sent to. So once the family has gone in and they've entered in for both the student and the parent, the taxable and untaxable income, the current year asset information, they've listed the schools where they want the FAFSA to be sent to, they're now ready to sign it. And so if the student has already signed in with their FSA ID, they don't have to enter the username and password again. They can just click the box that says sign with FSA ID. And then the parent, if both parents' information is on there, remember only one parent needs the FSA ID. So they will look and figure out which one has the FSA ID. Is it the parent 1 or parent 2? And it shows you the date of birth and the last 4 digits of the SOCH. So I know, okay, I'm parent 1 and I have the FSA ID. Then I will click provide signature. I'll type in my username and password as the parent, and then I'm ready to submit the FAFSA form. Please, please, please remind your families. It's important that they actually submit the FAFSA form. It is saved out there, but until they hit submit my FAFSA now, it doesn't go anywhere, and the colleges and universities do not receive record of it. So they know that they've clicked the submit my FAFSA now button when a confirmation page pops up and they can see that they successfully submitted the FAFSA form. If a family has submitted it and they've provided the electronic signatures, the FAFSA will lock down for processing for that 48 to 72 hour time period. So they will not be able to go back in and review it or make any corrections to it until they are notified that the FAFSA has been processed. They can then log back in. So if after they have submitted it, they need to add more schools, they log back in, go under the correction link. Actually, for 22-23, there's supposed to be an easier link added to the website that says add a school. So they can go right to the add a school section if that's all they need to add, and they can add more schools on and resubmit the FAFSA form. If they realize they did make a mistake, so say they did include their 401k in the assets when they should not have, they can go in to the the asset information section and they can correct that and they can resubmit the FAFSA form. Many schools, once they receive that updated FAFSA form with a change in some figures, will ask the family to document or explain why they made that change. Corrections are permitted, updates are not. So take, for example, the family listed $5,000 in assets, and then that money had to be used for something 3 weeks after they submitted the FAFSA form. You cannot go in and update that information. The asset information is captured at that moment in time that they have submitted the FAFSA form. So it's not updatable. But as I said, if they made a mistake and they included something that they never should have to begin with, they can go in and make a correction to that section. Corrections may also in some cases be made by submitting documentation to the financial aid office. So some schools don't like for students to go out and make corrections to their FAFSA because it's just going to require us to reach out and ask, why did you make that correction? So some schools may just tell the student if they call in, you know what, just send me the documentation to support that, or a written statement explaining that you made a mistake, and let the school make the correction for the student. So as I mentioned earlier, special circumstances we recognize do exist, and the FAFSA does not always capture those special circumstances. So if a condition exists that cannot be documented on the FAFSA form, the student and parent should still file the FAFSA as it's directed with the 2020 taxable and untaxable income and the current assets. And then they will want to provide a written explanation with documentation to the college's financial aid office explaining what their special circumstance is and why we should recalculate or review their eligibility for financial aid. Most colleges have an appeal process. Some call it a special circumstance form. Some call it an EFC recalculation form. Some call it an income appeal form. It just depends on the school. The philosophy behind it is typically the same. So the colleges, when a student reaches out and says, I have special circumstances, will direct them to their form, ask the student again to write a written explanation and provide documentation to support it. So let's take, for example, I provided 2020 taxable and untaxable income, but I lost my job halfway through 2020, or I lost my job going into 2021. What I could provide to that school is a copy of my 2021 taxes when I file them at the end of this year and show them, you know, look at my 2020 income and now look at my 2021 income and see it's less. And then the school could, if they choose, to use the 2021 income instead of 2020. So only the school can go in and make that change to the FAFSA because we flag it and we let federal student aid know, hey, the information was correct to begin with, but now we're using our professional judgment to make a change. And then we're hoping that that recalculates that EFC and lowers it and makes the students eligible for more financial assistance. So that's just an example of how the appeal process works. Each college may have a different way of viewing them. So one school may say, you know what, let's use 2021 income. Some school may say, let's use your 2022 estimated income. So each school may do it a little bit differently. Now, if a student has submitted their FAFSA to 5 different schools and they want to see how their income changes would be impactful at each school, they will have to complete that appeal process at all 5 of those colleges to see what the financial aid outcome would be. So they do need to understand if they're looking at more than one school, they don't just do the appeal at one school, they would have to do it at all of the schools that they are considering. Once the decision is made by the financial aid office, it is final and it cannot be appealed to the Department of Education. So if the school says, I don't see where that is going to make a difference, or I'm not going to take into consideration your excess medical and dental expenses, even though another school did, you cannot appeal that to the Department of Education. So we spend time on this with you because we know right now families are coming into you to talk about filing the FAFSA form, and they're probably telling you their unusual circumstances. So we want you to know a little bit about it so that you know to refer them to the financial aid offices to discuss their unusual expenses. So the most common ones that we see are loss of employment or changes in income, loss of child support. So if a family received child support in 2020 they have to report that as income on the 22-23 FAFSA form. But we know that child support typically ends when a student turns 18 or graduates high school. So that would be an appealable item that they would want to appeal and have taken into consideration. Also, sometimes divorce or death of a parent or spouse occurs after the FAFSA has been submitted. So a family would want to identify that to the financial aid office so that we can reevaluate the student's eligibility. Unusual medical or dental expenses that are not covered by insurance. If you have a family that's taking care of a child that has special needs and insurance only covers a portion of it, they could document to the school's financial aid office how much they paid in medical and dental expenses for a specific year. And if the school finds it's warranted, they could go and, for example, reduce the adjusted gross income by the $5,000 that the family paid out of pocket for medical and dental expenses. So these are just a few of the common ones that we see, but anybody that has anything else that's not defined in the FAFSA should identify that to the financial aid office for consideration. And the school's financial aid office will let them know if that is something that can be considered or not. So let's regroup with verification here. So students may be selected for this process called verification after they have submitted their FAFSA to Federal Student Aid. Federal Student Aid does a random selection of roughly 22% of the FAFSAs that they receive. And they will notify the student on the processed FAFSA results. There are comments on the front page of it that says you've been selected for a process called verification. Your school's financial aid office will reach out to you and let you know what documentation they need. And then the schools are notified what students have been selected for verification, and we reach out to the student and let them know what documentation we need. Please tell your families that we aren't accusing them, or FSA is not accusing them of lying on the form or providing information on purpose. It is just a way to randomly review the FAFSAs, just like the IRS does with our tax returns, just to make sure that families have provided the information properly and that the federal assistance is getting into the hands of the right students with the right situation. You may have heard that for the current financial aid year for 21-22, financial aid offices were given a waiver. And we were not required for a period of time, starting in July through the rest of the 21-22 year, to verify FAFSAs that were selected for verification. This came as a part of the COVID relief. But we have already been told that that waiver will not be renewed for 22-23. So if you've known that and you've worked with families for the current year, please know that that will not be renewed for the 22-23 financial aid year. So if a student is selected for verification, the school's financial aid office will be reaching out to them and letting them know what forms we need. Students should reply to that request for information as soon as possible. And please read the request carefully. So if it asks for a signature, don't submit it without a signature, or it will be rejected and it will take more time for review. And as I mentioned earlier, some schools will set a deadline date for those verification documents. And just because they miss the date doesn't mean they can't still submit it, because for federal aid, they're still eligible for Pell and loans regardless of those dates. But for those smaller pots of money, for example, schools may have said you may have submitted the FAFSA priority date, but you didn't meet our verification deadline date. And so therefore you've missed out on a certain award that we may have offered you otherwise. If they are selected for verification, the two most common items that are asked for are a verification worksheet, where we'll ask the student to explain who lives in their household by name and relationship, because we want to verify, did they put grandma in the household when they shouldn't have, for example. So when we see the list by the name and relationship, we can start asking questions on whether or not someone should have been included in that number in household or number in college. And then the other most common document we request is a copy of their taxes. So for the 22-23 FAFSA, if they're selected, we will need a copy of the student and parents 22 federal tax return or a federal tax return transcript. And if they did the IRS data retrieval tool successfully, they would not need to provide that, because that's considered verified with a successful transmission of IRS data. On occasion, a student or parent may be asked to provide a copy of all the W-2s that correlate with their 22 or their 2020 tax return. Or if they didn't file taxes and they were selected for verification, we need a copy of all of those W-2s. And then if a parent or an independent student says that they did not and were not required to file, they will be required, if selected for verification, to provide a verification of non-filing letter. And so this is basically to just say the IRS needs to tell the financial aid office, yes, indeed, this family was not required to file a tax return. Dependent students that did not file taxes are not required to obtain a non-filing letter. These letters of non-filing could take some time. So that's why we want families to pay attention to those requests for information, and we want to get that information back to us as soon as possible. So for the verification of income, families can provide a signed copy of their federal income tax return and all schedules for 2020. Or if they don't have a copy of their tax return, they can get a copy of their IRS tax return transcript directly from the IRS by going to this website or calling the IRS at this 1-800 number. And that should be signed as well, even though there's not a spot on there for a signature. The family should sign the tax return transcripts. So school will notify them that they've been selected. School will say, we need verification of your income, so please provide us with a copy of your federal income tax return, or please request a tax return transcript. If they go online or call in, they cannot have the transcripts faxed or mailed to a third party. We used to be able to have them send it directly to the university, but they're not allowed to do that. So this is another step that could take some time for the family, is going in and requesting the transcript and waiting for it to be mailed to them, and then they have to provide it to the college's financial aid office. Again, another reason why we encourage the use of the data retrieval tool. So once the student has submitted the FAFSA, listed all of the colleges and universities they want it sent to, that FAFSA gets sent to all of those financial aid offices. Now, most schools will start bringing those FAFSAs in toward the end of this year or the beginning of 2022. So even though the FAFSA goes live October 1, a lot of us are not ready with our systems to bring in the 22-23 FAFSA forms. We're still trying to recover from getting our fall semester started. So tell families not to be concerned if they submit their FAFSA early in October, if they don't hear anything from the financial aid office, unless it's a school that had one of those early financial aid priority dates. I would anticipate if they have a November or December priority date, they're probably going to be hearing from that school in November and December. Some schools actually start sending financial aid offers in November and December. But the bulk of your institutions probably won't start bringing those FAFSAs in until January and February. We'll start going back out to students in February saying you've been selected for verification. Here are the documents we need. And then in March and April is when we target getting those financial aid offers out to students so that they are ready to compare their offers in time for that May 1 commit date for accepting admission to the colleges that they want to go to. So schools bring in the FAFSAs, we review them, we determine if we need additional information, and then we put together a financial aid offer. Now those offers may be mailed in a paper packet that's really fancy from some schools. It may just be a one-page letter that's mailed to the student with their financial aid offer. And some schools don't even send financial aid offers in the mail. They refer students to the school portal to review their financial aid offer. So students need to be paying attention probably to the admissions information or communicating with the financial aid offer to find out, how are you going to be communicating with me on my financial aid process? Many schools will assign a student an email account that's attached to that school and ask them to activate it, even though they have not accepted an offer for admission. And they will refer students to the school portal for information about the financial aid process, and stop sending financial aid information and billing information home to the student and parent. The financial aid offer at the very minimum should include the cost of attendance that was used. So encourage families or remind them, don't panic when you see the cost of attendance, because families will say, you know what, I thought it was only $10,000 in tuition and fees, and you're showing me a $22,000 cost of attendance. We'll remind them that that cost of attendance includes tuition fees, books, housing, transportation, and miscellaneous and personal expenses, the overall cost to attend school. So it should show them the cost of attendance and the EFC that was used to determine their financial aid offer. It should then tell them the amount of aid they have been offered, and they should break it out by each financial aid program. There should be an explanation of how and when the aid is dispersed to the student's account, and a reference to terms and conditions of the offer. So once a student has a financial aid offer, there are terms and conditions that apply to it. How did they get the money to begin with, and how do they keep the financial aid offer based on those terms and conditions. There are several different sources of financial aid. The federal government is the largest source, and then states also have financial assistance. So the state of Ohio Department of Higher Education has state grants and scholarships. The FAFSA form is the initial application for most state grants. Then colleges and universities also have grants and scholarships. So students want to be looking at the school's financial aid website to see, is there a scholarship application I need to be completing to apply for my college's scholarships? And are there additional forms that I need to be completing? And then families should be looking at their employers. Do employers have a tuition benefit for their dependent, for the dependents of their employees? And then private sources, looking at churches and other civic organizations, local foundations. So students should be doing some research, especially in the high schools. We know that counselors receive information about outside scholarships, as well as some community scholarships that are based on the community in which the student lives. So financial aid is broken out into categories of financial aid. So we have gift aid, self-help aid, and merit-based aid. And so the gift aid are the grants and scholarships that do not need to be paid back. Self-help aid would be student loans, VA benefits, work-study jobs. Most of the self-help aid do still require a FAFSA. And I'm going to take a quick moment here to say, when you're talking to families, if they tell you, you know what, I know that I'm only going to be eligible for a student loan, I'm not going to take time to file that FAFSA, please encourage them to file the FAFSA anyway. They may be overestimating, first of all, and not realize that they're eligible for something. But if they don't submit a FAFSA to the institution for institutional dollars, I can't offer them some of our funds that may not require as much need as, say, a Pell Grant does. And so we want families to always submit that FAFSA. If a student is offered a loan and they don't want it, they can decline it. We don't want students to take out loans that they do not need. But we do want students to have opportunities to receive as much aid as they possibly can. And then there's merit-based aid, which is typically based on their academic performance. Merit-based aid can come from an incoming freshman, so a high school student based on their high school academics, but merit-based aid can continue throughout their academic career in the college. Scholarship searches, please remind families, do not pay for scholarship searches. They are free. Do not use a credit card or check. They shouldn't be participating in those. Pursue local scholarships, check with colleges and universities on their own applications, and then look at certain scholarship search engines. And we have some of that information on our OASFA.org page under counselors and parents resources. I'm going to quickly go through the different financial aid programs because we're getting close to time here, and I want to make sure that we've allowed time for questions as well. So the state aid programs, again, initial application is through the FAFSA form. So for October, for the OCOG, the Ohio College Opportunity Grant, they have to submit the FAFSA by October 1 of 2022 for the 22-23 FAFSA form. Students have to be Ohio residents, and they have to be attending an eligible Ohio or Pennsylvania institution. A public and private colleges do participate. Currently, the EFC for an OCOG is $2190 or less, and the maximum household income is $96,000. This is determined all by the response on the FAFSA form. So as long as a student has filed the FAFSA form and they're Ohio residents, they are giving permission to FAFSA to send the information to the state of Ohio. And then the colleges and universities work with Ohio Department of Higher Ed to determine the Ohio College Opportunity Grant eligibility. Student can receive a maximum of 10 semesters or 15 quarters of enrollment in the OCOG program. It's important to note, first of all, I didn't change the year up there, but students attending community colleges and regional campuses, so Columbus State, COTC, for example, Ohio State Newark, OU Zanesville, students attending those type of campuses in most cases are not eligible for OCOG, even if they're in the EFC and the income range. And the philosophy behind that is that the tuition is less at those type of institutions, so OCOG eligibility does not apply to them. There are a few exceptions. One of them is if the student has been in the foster youth system and they provide the training voucher, the ETV, to the school's financial aid office, they can process the OCOG eligibility. Also, if a student has exhausted all of their Pell at a period of time in the award year, they may be eligible for a little bit of OCOG. So there's a little bit of an exemption there, but for the most part, a student attending those type of institutions are not eligible for the OCOG. Then there's the federal programs. The Pell Grant, which is based on the EFC currently. So the student has to demonstrate a specific EFC range. So an EFC of 0 gets the maximum Pell of $6,495 in the current year. We don't know the 22-23 amounts yet. And then an EFC of 5576 is the highest that it will go right now for a student to be eligible for the minimum Pell, which is 672. So the FAFSA directly tells us, based on the student's EFC, whether or not they will be eligible for a Pell Grant. Then there's the federal SEOG, the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. That grant, the student must demonstrate exceptional need. This is a campus-based fund, a small pot of money that the school has been given that they may use those priority dates to determine the student's eligibility for that, because we run out of those funds quickly. So the student wants to meet those priority dates. We award to the students with the lowest EFC first. So it is very rare that a student that is not Pell eligible will see the SEOG. The awards can range from $100 to $4,000, but typically they are between about $100 to $500 a semester. So those aren't huge grants, but they do help make up that cost of attendance and may help pay for a book or two. Then there's the Federal Work Study Program. Again, another small pot of money that the school's financial aid offices that participate in it have, usually driven by those priority dates. Federal Work Study is eligible or available to undergraduate and graduate students, whereas Pell and SEOG and OCOG are strictly for undergraduate students. Federal Work Study could be employment on campus or off campus. The benefit of Federal Work Study is if a student works, for example, in 2021 under Federal Work Study, when they file the FAFSA that's looking for the 2021 tax year, they will be including that in their income. But there's an exclusion where they get to remove the earnings from the calculation. So we're not holding what we call financial aid against the student. The student would then have the ability to work on or off campus with the school or federal or state or local public agencies. It's just a way to help offset their educational expenses. Federal Work Study is earned by a paycheck. It does not apply directly to the student's bill. So even though they see Work Study on their financial aid offer, they need to keep in mind that Federal Work Study amount will not get deducted from their student bill. They have to find a job and they have to work and earn that money. And then there are federal student loans. Students can borrow direct loans without any credit check or income. All they have to do is file the FAFSA. Regardless of parent and student income, every student is eligible for a federal student loan if they aren't already in default on a prior federal student loan. So we want families to know that, even though you have a higher income, the student at the very minimum will be eligible for a federal student loan, and they can borrow it without any support from the parent. They don't need to have a cosigner or a credit check or income. Then the parent can also borrow a Direct Plus loan in their name on behalf of their dependent student. That does have a credit check built into it. And if it's denied based on their credit check, the student could borrow an additional amount of money in their name. So while we, again, don't want families to have to take on student loan debt, we recognize that it is a necessary option, and it's not the worst case scenario if they were to borrow a federal direct student loan or a parent loan. We do encourage them, even though we've offered them a certain amount, to only borrow what they need. Students can reduce the amount offered and say, I only need this amount of money, not what you offered to me. And we look at loans as an investment in their future. So again, to apply for a student loan, the student has to file the FAFSA form. They should review all of their award letters from all of the schools to learn about their eligibility. If the student chooses to take out a student loan, they have some additional steps that they would complete at studentaid.gov. The school will guide them through that process. It should be a part of their financial aid offer that if you accept this loan, you have to go in and sign a promissory note, and you have to complete entrance counseling. Same thing for the parent. If the parent borrows a loan, there's a parent loan application, and they have to sign a master promissory note. If the students need any further assistance beyond what you can provide for them, and I should have said this very early on, we do not expect counselors to be the experts in this process. We just want to arm you with enough information to answer some basic questions. But anytime you can't, please refer them to a college financial aid office or to the outreach committee. But if the student has very specific questions, they could email FSA or call FSA at this email address or this phone number. We like students to reach out to the financial aid office or the outreach committee before reaching out to federal student aid in most cases. So I'm going to briefly go through the benefits of OASPA and what our committee offers to you. Our committee can help you coordinate a financial aid night at your school. So we recognize that there may still be some schools that just aren't quite ready to do in person. We could schedule a virtual live presentation for you. We can send an in-person presentation if you would like to do that. We also on our website have a recorded version of a financial aid night that you can link to your website or you can email out to your parents. It's basically the same type of presentation that if a financial aid representative would come to your school and do a presentation, it is all of that information about how to get started with the FAFSA and what happens next. So please, if you need help with a financial aid night, log in here, put in a request, and we get an email and we reach out to you and we try to work with you, whether you need virtual or in person, or to send you the link for the recorded version. We would like, if you have not already done so, to put your information in our student counselor and access contact database. Our current website does not really allow us to have membership and for you to sign up out there for us to keep information flowing to you. So we would like you to go into our database on oaspa.org, go to the page for counselors, and log in, or not log in, but sign up for our email database so that you're notified of all of our events, especially here in the next week or so. We will be sending out the information on those counselor workshops that we are offering in November. It says registration is live on this slide. It's not live just yet. It will be soon. All right, I just went through a lot of information in a really quick period of time, and I know Morralee says that she has been answering your questions as you go along. If you do have any more questions, we're going to stay on here for a few more minutes and allow you to pop more questions in there. Also, again, this was just a teaser to get you interested in or not interested, but get you brought up to speed a little bit on the financial aid process. That way, before you attend one of our counselor workshops, you have some basis for your training there. Oh, hang on, Morralee. There you go.
Thanks, Faith. There are still questions coming in, so I thought I would try to answer these out loud. But just so you know, Faith, there is a request if you could go back one slide. They want to see something. So Nina, let me know if Faith goes to the right slide. All right, a question that we have yet. When would you recommend high schools host a financial aid night for students and families? Should it be November before priority dates, or are December and January common? I will tell you that what we see at OASPA often are, if what you're doing is a financial aid information night, we see those often held in like September and early October so that you can explain the entire financial aid process. One of the things that you can do if you're going to host one of those nights, on that OASPA counselor page, there's a place where you can go in and request a financial aid presenter, so we can try to identify someone who may be able to do your financial aid night. Oftentimes they do the financial aid information nights early in the fall so the families will understand. And then schools may opt to hold a FAFSA completion event or a FAFSA completion workshops where parents and students can come in and get their FAFSA done. And those tend to be in October or November. Many high schools will also might do a spring financial aid information night that's targeted to the juniors to get them all set up for the freshmen or for their senior year. So there's lots of options in terms of when to do it, but I think early fall is when you see most common financial aid nights.
So we had a question that I answered, but someone asked where they could find the priority date for all of the schools. And that is on that oaspa.org page under counselors information. There's a lot of information on that page. So just keep scrolling down, a lot of information that we update there.
All right, any other questions? And again, they can be about information you saw here in the presentation or general financial aid questions you may have that Faith and I can try to take a stab at. Go ahead and type those in the Q&A box.
Well, we either overwhelmed them or we answered their questions as we went along. So
yeah, and I would just also point out, if your parents and students are looking for some FAFSA resources on that OASPA website, we have a FAFSA Help Ohio section that has 2 pages. One is a calendar of events. If you are going to host a FAFSA completion event at your high school and want it advertised on our calendar, you can go to FAFSAHelpOhio.org, and there'll be a link there that you can complete the form, and we'll get your FAFSA completion event up on our website. There's also a resource page for counselors and students. We have most of that updated. We have to wait for October 1 till the actual on the page. So yes, so please feel free to share that FAFSA Help Ohio resource page with your parents and students if they're looking for FAFSA help. There is a question there about, concerns about students who have parents not providing any info. We run into that situation a lot, and there's a couple different types of situations. There oftentimes are parents who refuse to provide their financial information on the FAFSA. There's no strained relationship with the student or anything like that. They simply refuse to provide information. That is the toughest situation that we have to deal with, because there are really not much the financial aid office can do about that. Their hands are tied when the parent refuses. There is an option on the FAFSA to complete the form with the student information only. There's a place where you can indicate that you're not able to provide parent information. That FAFSA will be processed and sent to the colleges, but unfortunately, in terms of federal and state aid, they're only going to be eligible for an unsubsidized student loan, or if they happen to qualify for any merit aid at the college, they may be eligible for merit aid. In other cases where it's sort of a drastic situation, there's either potential harm to the student, or the parent and students have not had any type of relationship for a lengthy amount of time, you may want to reach out to the financial aid office, talk about the special circumstances surrounding the student, and see if the institution or institutions may recommend that the student file a dependency appeal to be considered as an independent student. But that takes some pretty drastic situations for dependency appeals to be granted. But if the student is in that situation, then we would recommend that you reach out and find out if that is possible. All right, any last questions? If not, thanks. We are glad you're with us. As Faith reminded you, we will be doing 2 webinars in October that are line by line, how to complete the FAFSA. So if you really want to learn exactly how to complete a FAFSA, please jump on that counselor resource page and sign up for October 14th or October 26th. So thanks for coming today, and we'll look forward to having you on a future webinar.
Thank you all. Have a great day.